Good morning, and welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. This morning, we're going to continue our reading and discussion of the book Rome and Civil Liberty by J.A. Wiley. Yesterday, we concluded on page 22 a very eloquent and detailed account of the blessings, the divine blessings that were bestowed upon Great Britain and the rest of the Protestant countries in the world because of the Protestant Reformation. It was very eloquent, very powerful, and we need to take heed to what James A. Wiley attributes to the Protestant Reformation. And the Protestant Reformation was literally, a rejection of papal tyranny. That's what Protestantism is. The exchange of Christ in the place of Antichrist. Okay? Protestantism left the tyranny of the Pope. They viewed the papacy as the Antichrist of the Bible, the man of sin, the beast. And they chose Christ as their king. They left the error of Romanism, which had dominated and tyrannized all of Europe for 1,000 years. And they put Christ on his rightful throne, and God responded, and he blessed them, and he gave them advancements and privileges and blessing and honor. Made the Protestant nations a shining light, a bright example of what liberties Christ bestows upon his people after they've shed the Antichrist and relegated him to nothingness. That's what they did. Now, we'll conclude this chapter in the last paragraph of this chapter. James A. Wiley continues, and if you're following along in your own copy or the online copy of the book, we're on the first full paragraph on page 22. James A. Wiley says, "But the Reformation is not completed. Its work, as yet, is but half accomplished. The pause that has occurred has made some misdoubt the power of its great principles and their adaptability to modern times, and to talk of seeking somewhere for some new and mightier moral forces. Instead of being led away by this hallucination, which tends only to retrogression," in other words, if you're going to misdoubt the Protestant Reformation, if you're going to begin to doubt the Protestant Reformation and start looking for some newer and mightier moral force, you're apt to wind up back under papal tyranny. And that's exactly what James A. Wiley feared for Britain and for all the Protestant countries. He says, "Let us arise, and assured that the Reformation is but another name for Christianity, Christianity come out of its sepulcher of 1,000 years, excuse me, Christianity, in other words, true biblical Christianity, is Protestantism, which had been suppressed by the papacy for over 1,000 years." He says, "and believing of its principles are for the whole world, let us strive to send its regenerating and healing influence downwards among the masses of our own country and outwards to the very extremities of the earth. Completed, the Reformation never will be till it has made every country under heaven what Britain now is, and more than Britain now is. Completed, it never will be. Completed, the Protestant Reformation never will be till it has laid prostrate every tyrannical throne, rooted out every idolatrous church, razed every dungeon, that is R-A-Z-E-D, in other words, destroyed every dungeon broken every fetter, emancipated every nation and tribe that dwell beneath heaven's cope, and assembled them all in one ransomed and glorious throng before the throne of the Lamb, to join their voices in song, never again to cease upon the earth, as it never will cease in heaven. Quote, blessing and honor and glory and power be unto him that sitteth upon the throne and upon the Lamb forever and ever. Unquote. So at the very time when Rome was taking over in Protestant Great Britain, James A. Wiley is saying the Protestant Reformation is Christianity, and it should be spread all over the world. Roman tyranny should not exist anywhere in the world. But we know what the Scripture says. The wheat and the tares grow up together. And it's enough for us to know the difference between the wheat and the tares. That's what Inquisition Update is all about. Now, we'll continue to the next chapter of this book. This is the second part of the book, the Papal Aggression. And subtitle for this chapter is Pleasant Changes in the Distance. Now, before I even begin to read this part, I want you to know on the face of this, before we even start, that James A. Wiley is going to become very cynical here. He's going to become very, what's the word I should say to describe his tenor here? Sarcastic, okay? He is going to enumerate for us what the Romans, what the papists in England at this time are saying of themselves and how they have deceived the people of England into thinking there's no harm in Romanism. Okay? Don't be misled. I need you to know before we even begin, he's being very sarcastic here. Rome is doing what Rome always does. When she's in a minority, she's meek as a lamb, and she's lying in order to get her foot in the door, that once she has gotten her foot in the door and established her hierarchy and established her churches, established the shadow government in the land, then she takes over. Okay? Now, there is a sentiment that in Great Britain about religious equality, the same bill of goods they sold in this country during the colonial period. Religious liberty. What does religious liberty get a country? It's amazing. America has learned the second time the lesson that England should have taught us the first time. Again, the subtitle is Pleasant Changes in the Distance. Now he says, what matters it, many say, or may think, though the Church of Rome should regain her ascendancy in Great Britain? What would it matter? What would it matter if Rome gained the ascendancy in Great Britain? No big deal, right? I want you to understand the attitude that James A. Wiley is using here. It's a very interesting and a very useful convention. He says, what harm would it do us? Or what great change would it work upon our country? It would change, of course, the national creed and modify the forms in which our devotion is expressed. But the devotion itself would not be impaired. Nay, so far from impairing it, the likelihood is that by ministering certain helps and stimulants to it, which it lacks at present, our devotion would become a far warmer and certainly a far more aesthetic thing than it is now. The dominancy of the Roman faith would leave untouched the essence of our morality. Now remember, he's being sarcastic here. He knows that the Roman faith is idolatrous. It is the synagogue of Satan. This is what James A. Wiley truly believes of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, he says it's being promoted in England that what harm would it be if the Romans were held in equality with us Brits? He says the dominancy of the Roman faith would leave untouched the essence of our morality, which he just described previously as true Bible Christianity. The form of our government, it would leave untouched the essence of our morality, the form of our government, and the substance of our liberties. Surely by now you can recognize how cynical and sarcastic James A. Wiley is being, so much so as to to ridicule, to derision those who suggest that Britain ought to share as equal Christ with Antichrist. All right? He says no one political right of the least consequence would it abolish, and no one of our social customs on which we put any value would it set aside. We would be the same energetic race we are at this present hour. Our air would be as pure, our soil as fertile, our arts as prosperous, our commerce as vast, and our empire as great. Nay, there are some who think that the restoration of the ancient faith, that is, Roman Catholicism, would work a very pleasing and a very beneficial change, at least upon the exterior of society. It would relieve the tameness which the Reformation superinduced, and render the country in its outward aspects much more picturesque. Would it not mightily improve our ecclesiastical architecture? Now he's making fun of, well, right where it hurts the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church spends untold millions and billions of dollars to make the most magnificent edifices seen anywhere on the planet. Okay? Her people are literally reduced to slaves to raise the money for these magnificent cathedrals around the world. Now, James A. Wiley is cynically saying, well, if we go back to Romanism, or we allow Romanism to get a foothold in this country where we would once kick her out, well, our land will be graced with these most magnificent ecclesiastical architectures. Okay? Still hear the cynicism? It's a very interesting tack that James A. Wiley is taking. Let me tell you something. Anybody who considers the prospect of reducing Christ with Antichrist, that they should share the same land, that they should share the same throne in the name of religious liberty and peace, ought to be made fun of. Okay? He says, how proud should we be to see those magnificent, majestic cathedrals with their oriels, their rich tracery, their airy pinnacles, and their stupendous towers and domes, which are the pride of continental cities. In other words, the major Roman Catholic cities on the continent, this being England he's speaking about. Now, we have to have England just like the continental cities with these magnificent superstructures, churches of the Roman Catholic Church, rising in the midst of us and attracting the traveler's eye at many leagues distant. And then to enter these august edifices and say one's prayers, looking up the while into the face of the Madonna, or kneeling before some saint in marble. Okay? It's the idolatrous church, but boy, wouldn't we benefit if we allowed the idolatrous church of Satan to restore itself in Great Britain. How ravishing, he says. How ravishing to go into these magnificent edifices, lay on your knees and worship the Madonna or some saint in marble. How ravishing. You see the cynicism? Should not we be just as cynical? To think that this country, almost from its founding, has made Roman Catholicism equal with the true Christianity of Protestantism? How ravishing. Instead of sleeping under the drowsy sermon of some preacher, would not the whole aesthetic principle within us be revivified and roused to a holy intoxication by the priest's chant, the organ's mighty voice, typical of Roman Catholic churches, of the great, big, incalculably expensive pipe organs, okay, to go along with their incalculably expensive cathedrals, the mystic rites, the Mass, the fragrant fumes of flashing censer. Yes, don't you know in the Roman Catholic Church they have to go around the altar with that censer of incense, that smoke that rises up out of the pit. And they use this to chase away the evil spirits because they're about ready to sacrifice Jesus Christ all over again on the altar. That's why they incense the altar, to chase away the evil spirits so that they can kill Christ again. I'm not being cynical. I'm telling you the truth. The researchable truth. And I encourage each and every one of you to see for yourself what is done during the Mass of the Roman Catholic Church. He says, aided by the sobbings of the devotees around us, overcome like ourselves by these powerful spells, then indeed should we know what devotion is. In other words, England, once having allowed Roman Catholicism to come right back in, after once being kicked out, to share Christ's rightful throne, then, and only then, would England finally know what true devotion is. He says the ascendancy of the ancient faith, that is Roman Catholicism, would also greatly enliven our sober costume. What a change would pass upon our streets by the appearance upon them of the conventual habits of Southern Europe. Southern Europe was Roman Catholic. Spain, Portugal, France, and Italy. Okay? How delightful to see the holy men and even holier women trundling along in their gown of serge, their scapulars, their girdle of rope, their sandaled feet, their cowl, their crucifix, in short, tricked out in the whole of that mysterious gear which now we see only in pictures. Remember, England is Protestant officially. By oath, Roman Catholicism is not allowed. You don't see the trappings of Romanism in England at this time, only in pictures that must come from Europe. All of the mummeries of popery are confined to Southern Europe. The rest of Europe and Britain have been liberated by Christ. If you want to see popery, you have to go to Southern Europe or read books and magazines come from that area. He says, in short, tricked out in the whole of that mysterious gear, which now we see only in pictures, where they look so pretty, seeing one can put in all the poetry and keep out all that is not. Would not such importations tend to shame us out of our national demureness and help to make us emulate that vivacious gaiety which is thought to follow in the wake of a religion which teaches its votaries to masquerade on Sabbath and to pray only amid the glories of statuary and painting? Oh, yes, wouldn't we like to parade down Main Street, as do the Roman Catholics in Southern Europe, parading down Main Street in our most fancy Sunday gear, praying behind a procession carrying the Eucharist, making abject spiritual fools of ourselves. Wouldn't that be nice for Great Britain again? And then we could bend the knee to statues and paintings, which God forbids. Wouldn't it be nice to have Roman Catholicism back in Protestant Great Britain? He says, what a fascinating change would be wrought, too, on the interior of our churches. The pulpit, that, quote, drum ecclesiastic, unquote, with its somber trappings and its Bible theology, which so unmannerly disrupts the conscience of the sinner in its quiet sleep, would disappear. And in its place would come the snow-white marble altar, with its gorgeous furniture of gold and silver vessels, its chalice, its crucifix, and its candles burning at noonday. Our higher clergy, the equals of temporal princes, would perform their ministrations, quote, clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, unquote. An obvious reference to Revelation chapter 17. And instead of sanctuaries with unadorned walls, humble roofs, and monotonous rows of wooden pews, our congregations would meet amid the solemnities of nave and aisle and pillar, with the rich light falling in many checkered hues upon the marble floor. If we can buy all of this grandeur for a few dry papal dogmas, do we not well to strike a bargain? True, our theology would be somewhat more meager, but what our theology would lose, our worship would gain. The splendor of our rites and the fervor of our piety would more than make up for the meagerness of our divinity. Some few changes, too, would the full realization of the papal aggression introduce into our everyday life. We should get much into the habit, doubtless, like all devout people abroad, of wearing little dangling crosses, and of saying our prayers with the help of a string of beads. We would contract a liking for chrism and holy water. We would carry about with us bits of rotten bone and other precious relics, instead of insurance tickets as a protection against accidents and evil spirits. Small and tastefully decorated shrines to the Madonna would adorn the corners of our streets, and calvaries would rise beside our highways. Our vintners would sell their ale under the sign of this saint, and our craftsmen ply their trade under the sign of the other one. We'll come back with more cynicism when we get back from the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
pledge allegiance to the King of Kings, and to his kingdom come, on earth as it is in heaven. One holy nation, under our Heavenly Father, grace, mercy, justice for all.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued. Global demand vastly exceeds mine supply by more than 60% annually. There is little in the financial world more certain than a coming explosion in the prices of gold and silver. The U.S. dollar continues to lose value and respect as the world's reserve currency. Our nation faces challenges on many fronts, and a day doesn't pass without another economist bringing forth warnings of impending economic calamity. There has never been a better time than right now to acquire physical gold and silver. Discount Gold and Silver Trading was founded on the principles of truth and honesty. We believe in providing a quality product, quality service, and most importantly, competitive pricing. We provide all forms of precious metals, including American gold, silver, platinum, and rare investment and circulated coins. Silver bars, rounds, and 90% silver bags are on hand for the silver investor. Gold self-directed IRAs are available. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, that's 1-800-375-4188.
Welcome back to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support the programs, please prayerfully support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And if you would like to talk to me, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us. Now, continuing this cynical and sarcastic a very poignant and very artful convention, James A. Wiley is ridiculing his fellow countrymen for even suggesting that Romanism might be free to prosper and practice in Great Britain once it had already learned its lesson, a painful, painful lesson, and kicked the Jesuits out, kicked the Roman Catholic Church out, kicked the Pope out, closed all the Roman Catholic churches, made the practice of the Mass forbidden, made certain that the monarch of England was Protestant to the core, and swore so when they took their throne. Now the contemplation is that maybe they were a little too harsh on the Roman Catholics and should allow them back in. He says, what little would it matter? we would contract a liking. No, he says, we should get much into the habit, doubtless like all devout people abroad, of wearing little dangling crosses, of saying our prayers with the help of a string of beads. He's speaking of the rosary and crucifixes. He says we would contract the liking of chrism and holy water. We would carry about with us bits of rotten bone and other precious relics instead of insurance cards as protection against accidents and evil spirits. In the Roman Catholic faith, one is protected from evil spirits and accidents by wearing a relic in a small vessel around their neck, a little piece of bone or some hair or something from one of these dead saints of the Roman Catholic Church. I tell you, it is the most idolatrous religion, and it masquerades in the name of Christianity, and people are not wise enough to look at it to even tell the difference between the true body of Christ and the body of Antichrist. It's a shame. He says we would carry about with us bits of rotten bone and other precious relics instead of insurance tickets as a protection against accidents and evil spirits. Small and tastefully decorated shrines to the Madonna would adorn the corners of our streets, and Calvaries would rise beside our highways. He's describing the practice in Roman Catholicism of building idolatrous shrines all over the place. Little bitty churches where you can go in and worship an image or an idol. They're usually situated along roadways. We even see them occasionally here in Iowa these days, post-Vatican Council II. And he said Calvaries would rise beside our highways. What is he saying here? Have you ever heard of the practice of the Stations of the Cross? It is a practice in Roman Catholic countries by Roman Catholics to rehearse the crucifixion and Christ's entry into Jerusalem. And each station of the cross where they stop in this procession, this public procession on a street that is completely set aside for this practice, to stop and worship images and idols. And eventually, the procession winds up in the cross, and in some Roman Catholic countries, they even crucify somebody. Somebody will volunteer, and they'll nail them with nails to a cross and stand it up. It's a literal enactment of the crucifixion of Christ, called the Stations of the Cross. That's what happens in Roman Catholic countries. Today, it still is practiced. He says our vintners, in other words, those who make wine, would sell their ale under the sign of this saint, or our craftsmen ply their trade under the sign of that other saint. This is a practice in Roman Catholic countries of saint worship. You dedicate your life, or you dedicate your business or something to some dead saint of the Roman Catholic Church. And of course, it's the job of that saint, once you've dedicated your business, to stand over your business. Of course, you can't see him, unless, of course, there's a statue of him in your business. But to stand over your business and protect it from competition. That's Roman Catholicism. Wouldn't it? What harm would it do if we allowed Rome back into our country? He says our cabmen, that is, those who carry people from place to place on chariots or cabs, or cabbies, would swear by St. Anthony of Egypt, and our fishermen would swear by St. Anthony of Padua. Every week we should have a feet day, on which no servile work must be done, although on Sabbath that prohibition would be relaxed. It's a practice. He's talking about a practice in the Roman Catholic Church of the ecclesiastical calendar, where a certain day of every month or a certain day of every week is set aside for the veneration of a certain saint, dead saint. And you've got to close your business. I mean, you have to practice Roman Catholicism. It isn't just a casual thing. You have to close your business. You cannot work on these feast days of the Roman Catholic Church, which not a one is mentioned in the Bible. Not a one is holy, because only Christ, who is holy, can make anything holy. So they're feast days, whatever you want to call them. If Christ didn't make it holy, it's not holy, because only He's holy. So we can't call them holy days. And he says, no servile work must be done, although on Sabbath that prohibition would be relaxed. As a matter of fact, Sabbath is the seventh day. But nonetheless, Sunday in the Roman Catholic Church is the Sabbath, and it's a day of obligation, not a day of rest. All laws of rest are set aside on Sabbath, because you have to get up early Saturday night in preparation for your work that you have to do on Sunday. You have to go to Mass on Friday night to have all your sins forgiven by the priest, which of course means you have to confess all your sins to that priest in the privacy of a little confessional box where no one else can hear you but the priest, because only he can forgive you your sins. And so then you are thoroughly washed and thoroughly cleansed on the inside, so that you are fit to consume Jesus on Sunday morning at the Mass. There's no sin in you, because when you eat Jesus, when you eat the Mass, the sacrifice of the Mass, which is, the literal blood, body, soul, and divinity of Christ, you can't be still yet in your sins before you eat Jesus. And so you go to confession, then Sunday morning you have to get up early in your Sunday best. You got to spend a lot of money. Make sure you are fit to be presented in the Roman Catholic Church to eat Jesus. And then you eat Jesus, and hopefully you don't have an accident and regurgitate him. You don't want to eat Jesus when you have a tummy ache. Because if you spill Jesus after you've eaten him, it produces a tremendous, distasteful consequence for both you and the priest. And what difference would it make if Protestant Great Britain would allow this curse to return? Every week we would have a feast day on which no servile work must be done, although on Sabbath that prohibition would be relaxed. A few such quiet and harmless changes, and the matter would end. When all was over and finished, we would be astonished to find how easily we had slid into the true fold, and how comfortable we were now under the crook of the shepherd of the Tiber. Meanwhile, the country would go on as before. The Queen would open our Parliament every session. The two houses would meet and debate and legislate as now. The courts of law would try causes and administer justice by the old laws, Roman Catholic canon law. We should have our newspaper every morning and our conversation or lecture in the evening. We would go on laying down railroads and building steamships and buying and selling with all the earth. We would shoot grouse in September and make merry at Christmas. And our relish for the sports of the one season and the festivities of the other would be none the less that we were under papal rule. In short, Scotland would be Scotland still, and Old England would be Old England still, and it might be a little more so. Such is the picture which many draw of what would be the results of the triumph of Romanism in Great Britain. It might work, they think, a few changes on the surface of society, but it would fail to go deeper. Our books, our public meetings, our factories, our commerce, it would leave us. The great business of this world would go on just as before, and the only difference would be that men would travel to another and better world, but by a new road. The body of British law, British toleration, and British liberty would remain intact and entire. How great a delusion this is, the following pages are intended to show. Now, James A. Wiley is going to get deadly serious. He's had his fun making fun of the whore that sits on the beast. He's had his fun denouncing popery for the laughable fraud that it is. And now he's going to get serious. This portion of the chapter is entitled The Reconnoiter, or First Steps. He says the shock of the French Revolution convinced the Church of Rome that in the slumber in which she had passed the 18th century, she had rested her mitred head upon hidden fires, and that she must rouse herself and strike for her old dominion. In other words, restore her total control once again, or be swept out of existence. Now, I want to make clear, this author, James A. Wiley, has already recognized the destruction that came upon the papacy as a result of the Protestant Reformation. Now he's making reference to the French Revolution. This was the second blow Rome received. First, Protestantism that denounced the papacy as Antichrist, and then the French Revolution that denounced Christ and Antichrist. Okay? The French Revolution was an atheistic revolution. France had it up to here with Christianity. And they didn't want religion in their country anymore, so many of them didn't anyway. Now it says, accordingly, I want to finish my thought before I can continue. Rome had been, the Vatican, the papacy, had been struck with a 1-2 punch. This is where we make reference in the Bible to that mortal wound that the Roman Catholic Church received, that the Antichrist received. This was the mortal wound, which was eventually healed, and we can see that even in our own country today. This was confirmed by the previous book we read, The Global Vatican, by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. Rome is alive and well again. The Protestant Reformation certainly should have permanently destroyed popery, the Church of Antichrist, and if there had been any twitch, involuntary twitch left in that carcass, it should have been subdued by the French Revolution. But Antichrist is not so easily destroyed. Now, so we have to realize that history has confirmed the fulfillment of that prophecy, which predicts a mortal wound being inflicted. He said the shock of the French Revolution convinced the Church of Rome that in the slumber in which she passed the 18th century, she had rested her mitred head upon hidden fires, and that she must rouse herself and strike for her own dominion, or be swept out of existence. Okay? The Roman Catholic Church has to come back to life, or it is going to be permanently and forever destroyed, wiped out of existence. After having suffered the destruction of the Protestant Reformation, the liberty of Christ, and then the French Revolution, Rome had to do or die. That's what it amounted to. Now he says, accordingly, so soon as peace had returned to Europe, the Jesuits came forth from their hiding places and concocted that plan for reducing Britain under the yoke of Rome, which they have and ever since been pursuing with great astuteness and most astonishing success. So after the French Revolution, the Jesuits, which one might realize the Jesuits were behind the French Revolution to begin with, as a punishment of the papacy, and in order to get control of the papacy, which they did, and then to reconquer all of Europe and the rest of the world by first destroying Protestantism. If there are any people left in the world that believe that the papacy is the Antichrist of the Bible, then Rome is still threatened with eventual destruction. The Jesuits know this. The Jesuits have seen with their own eyes what happened to the papacy, what happened to Roman Catholicism, what happened to idolatry, the Church of Satan, the synagogue of Satan, when Christ was revealed once again to the world by the Bible and the Protestant Reformation. The Jesuits realized that if the papacy is ever going to rule this world, it cannot have any possibility of coming to a Protestant understanding of the Scriptures. So Protestantism has to go. Lock, stock, and barrel. By whatever means available. The end justifies the means. If the end, meaning the destruction of Protestantism, is absolutely essential for the restoration of the papacy and the exaltation of the papacy to global supremacy, Protestantism must go, and it is a do-or-die mission for the Jesuits. The Jesuits were created for one mission and one mission only, and that was to rout out Protestantism, lock, stock, and barrel wherever it exists in the world. The Jesuits are the Counter-Reformation. The Jesuits laid out their strategy against the Protestants at the Council of Trent. All right? They have been about their business ever since their creation, and they will continue in that effort, or they will cease to be Jesuits. And they will continue that effort until Christ's literal return. So we have an enemy. Protestantism has a permanent lethal enemy in Jesuitism. To understand what Rome has in store for Protestants, we must carefully watch the machinations of the Jesuits. All right, after the French Revolution, there was a general peace that broke out over Europe, and the Jesuits came forth from their hiding places and concocted that plan for reducing Protestant Great Britain under the yoke of Rome, which they have ever since been pursuing with great astuteness and most astonishing success. So what James A. Wiley's telling you, this new sentiment that they're seeing in England at the time, suggesting that religious liberty ought to be, that Catholicism ought to be restored to Great Britain, is the work of the Jesuits. Protestantism is the official government of Britain at this time. And Rome, the Jesuits, have to destroy Protestantism wherever it is. So they've got to make Britain Catholic. And that's what James A. Wiley has insisted is taking place, even in spite of all the history in England of Roman machinations, the Inquisitions, the overturning of Protestant crowns and thrones. James A. Wiley is putting a face, a name and a face upon that organization that is overturning Protestantism in Great Britain. He calls them the Jesuits. The Jesuits were being true to their oath to root out Protestantism wherever it is. And where was it at this time? Britain. And so all that was taking place in England at that time, in Britain at that time, was a result of Jesuit machinations. Now, he says that plan may be gathered from various hints dropped by Dr. Wiseman in his book, Four Last Popes, and in particular from his conversations there recorded with Pope Gregory XVI and Abbé Lamennais. A great work was to be done, and the first step was to prepare the proper instruments for the doing of it. With this view, the English college at Rome was restored. So the first thing the papacy did in its endeavor to Romanize Protestant Great Britain was to open a college at the Vatican for English students. Okay? English-speaking teachers, English-speaking priests were to run this college. A college not on British soil, but a college on Roman soil, Vatican soil. That's the first thing the Jesuits did, was open a college for English citizens, children, in Rome. Okay? He said, with this view, the conquering of Protestantism in Great Britain, the English college at Rome was restored. This was the deed of Pope Pius VII and his well-known minister, Cardinal Consalvi. This college had been closed for the period of a generation. On the 18th of December, 1818, a small band of youths entered that college and took possession of its long deserted corridors and chambers. Who were these youths, and from what country had they come? They had come from Great Britain. They had been selected with great care and sent to Rome to be educated under the keen eye and the skillful hand of the Jesuits, that when their education was finished, they might come back to England and begin their work of reconquering Britain to the Roman faith. This is the systematic Jesuit destruction of Protestantism in England begun by the Jesuits. And we'll get to what they've done in the United States the next time on the broadcast. You've been listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. Stay tuned for more Protestant education. I'll see you.